What happens in a multiplayer game of Magic when a player leaves the game? Whether through concession, state-based actions such as life total being 0 or below, 10 or more poison counters, or drawing from an empty library, or a specific card that makes a player lose the game, when a player is eliminated, here is the order of events that follow. First, all objects owned by that player leave the game. An object is an ability on the stack, a card, a copy of a card, a token, a spell, a permanent, or an emblem. This means all of these objects in every zone of the game immediately ceases to exist, including any cards controlled by opponents or cards in exile under opponents' permanents, cards phased out, etc. Then any effects which gave the eliminated player control of any object or player stop. So if a player loses the game after resolving an insurrection, all of those creatures will return to the previous controller. This includes otherwise permanent effects like Gilded Drake or Dominate, giving the permanent back to the player who controlled it last. If a player loses while mindslaving another player, that mindslave effect will cease, returning control of the turn to the active player. If the eliminated player still controls any objects, they cease to exist. These would be cards owned by opponents that entered the battlefield under the eliminated player's control, such as through reanimation or bribery effects. Since there was no previous controller, these are exiled rather than returned to the control of another player. Any object that leaves the game during this process will technically trigger leaves effects such as an Oblivion Ring leaving the battlefield, but a player who has left the game can't put triggered abilities on the stack, so the Oblivion Ring trigger will never return the exiled permanent. A card with more contemporary text, such as Grasp of Fate, which says, "Until this permanent leaves the battlefield," is not a trigger, and therefore will allow those exiled cards to return to the battlefield. Since an eliminated player can't place triggers on the stack, a delayed trigger such as Flickerwisp trying to return an exiled permanent at the beginning of the next end step will not be able to resolve, leaving that permanent exiled indefinitely. If a card controlled by a player still in the game triggers from certain objects leaving, they will trigger, so an Extractor Demon will trigger for every creature the eliminated player controlled. But this doesn't count as creatures dying or being exiled, so they won't trigger Soul Herder or Blood Artist effects. Permanents owned by players that are still in the game that were enchanting or equipped to the eliminated player or one of their permanents will fall off. Any auras that fall off this way will be sent to the graveyard due to state-based actions. Once all of this has occurred, the turn continues, moving through all steps and phases of the turn. Players gain priority in each step and phase normally, there just isn't an active player, so the next player in turn order will get priority first. Any abilities controlled by players still in the game will still trigger at appropriate times as you move through the turn. Once you've passed beyond that turn, play continues normally.